It's an average morning in the quiet suburban neighborhood, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting a soft glow over the row of neatly trimmed lawns and perfectly paved driveways. The air is cool and crisp as the resident steps outside to grab the morning paper. They expect to find the usual nothing special, but as they walk toward the driveway, something catches their eye. It's a glint of metal, a sharp, unnatural reflection that doesn't belong there at first. They think it's a trick of the light, but as they get closer, their stomach drops and their heart races because there it is, plain as day, a set of metal spike strips stretched across the entire driveway, blocking the path completely. They stop frozen in place, their mind racing, trying to make sense of what they're seeing. The spikes are about a foot long, jagged and sharp, every inch designed to puncture a tire or cause damage to anything that tries to pass over them. They can't believe it. Who would do this? Why would anyone go through the trouble of placing something so dangerous right in front of their house? It's too calculated, too deliberate to be an accident. They scan the area around them, but no one is in sight. The street is eerily quiet, no cars parked, no neighbors milling about, just an unsettling silence that makes their skin crawl. They can't shake the feeling that someone is watching them from a distance, just waiting to see how they'll react. They step closer to the spikes, eyes narrowing as they inspect the damage. There's no note, no explanation, just the spikes themselves, almost daring them to make the first move. They feel a growing sense of dread pooling in their gut. This isn't just some prank, it's a message, but who could it be from? It doesn't take long for their thoughts to land on one person: Karen, the local HOA member, the one with a reputation for being overly controlling and micromanaging every detail of the neighborhood, from the grass length to the mailbox design. She's been a thorn in everyone's side for years, and this kind of stunt feels like something she would do. Her name alone sends a chill down their spine. They've clashed with her before over petty disputes, but nothing as extreme as this. They stand there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Should they just call the police? Should they confront Karen directly? Or should they wait and see if she shows up again? The last option feels like the one that would give them the most satisfaction, but they don't have the luxury of waiting around. They need to act fast before the spikes cause any real harm to someone else. Maybe a neighbor might unknowingly drive over them, or worse, a child might come riding down the street on a bike without noticing the dangerous trap set before them. With their mind made up, they march back into the house, grabbing their phone. On the way, they quickly dial the police, their fingers trembling slightly as they press the numbers. They explain the situation to the dispatcher, their voice shaky but firm. There's a pause on the other end, then the dispatcher assures them that officers are on their way. But as they hang up and turn back toward the driveway, they feel the weight of the situation sinking in. This is real. This isn't just an inconvenience or a petty dispute. This is something far more dangerous, and the person responsible for it is someone who has always believed they could get away with anything, no matter how outrageous. As the resident stands there in the driveway, their mind is racing with a mix of anger, disbelief, and a growing sense of urgency. They glance around the quiet neighborhood. Once more, the houses all lined up in neat rows. Nothing seems out of place, but something feels off, like the calm before a storm. They can't help but wonder how far Karen would go to make a point, how far she's already gone with this petty obsession of hers that's taken over every inch of her existence. They can almost hear her voice in their head, as if she was standing right there, acting all innocent, pretending she didn't know anything about the spike strips. But they know better. They've dealt with her before. The way she insists on enforcing every rule, no matter how trivial or overbearing, and how she's made life miserable for everyone who dared to challenge her authority. They've seen it happen too many times. Karen is the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, and to her the HOA rules are sacred. They serve her interests alone, and anyone who doesn't comply is either ignored or punished. But this is different. This crosses a line that even Karen wouldn't be able to hide behind her usual smug smile. They look down at the spikes again, the metal glinting in the early morning light, as if mocking them, daring them to step forward and do something about it. But they're not afraid, not anymore. They're not going to let Karen get away with this. They walk back toward the house, their phones still in hand. They need to call the police again, to give them an update. They need to make sure they know the seriousness of the situation. But just as they turn to enter the house, they hear a voice behind them, a familiar voice, too familiar. The hairs on the back of their necks stand up as they recognize the sound of Karen's footsteps, heavy and purposeful, approaching from behind. They don't turn around at first, but they can feel her presence like a dark cloud hovering just out of sight. And then they hear her words dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, I see you've noticed the little addition to your driveway," she says, her tone overly polite, like she's offering a neighborly gesture rather than a dangerous trap. "I thought it would help with the parking situation around here," she continues with a smug chuckle, as if she expects them to thank her for it. They finally turn around and face her. Karen stands there, arms crossed, with a look of superiority on her face, like she's done nothing wrong, like this is all just a minor issue that's being blown out of proportion. They can feel their pulse quicken as they meet her gaze, not willing to back down. "Not this time, you can't be serious," they say through gritted teeth, the words almost escaping their lips. In a harsh whisper, Karen raises an eyebrow, as if surprised by the intensity of their reaction. "What's the problem?" she asks, as if she's genuinely confused. "It's just a little deterrent, nothing to worry about," she shrugs, like it's the most casual thing in the world. But the resident isn't having it. They take a deep breath, trying to steady their nerves. But the anger is building. They've had enough of Karen's games, enough of her thinking she can control everything around her with no consequences. They step closer to her, their voice firm. "You've gone too far this time. You can't just go around putting spikes on people's property. That's dangerous and illegal." They say the words loud and clear. Karen scoffs. She doesn't take them seriously, still acting as if the situation is a joke. "It's not illegal," she insists. "It's just a little inconvenience." But the resident knows better. They've read the law. They've seen how far Karen is willing to push her power, and they won't let her get away with it this time. "I'm calling the police," they say without hesitation, pulling out their phone and dialing the number once again, as Karen stands there watching them with an infuriating grin on her face, her eyes gleaming with defiance. The resident watches as Karen's grin widens, a sense of superiority radiating from her, as if she's just won some small victory. The resident can feel their blood boiling, frustration creeping up their spine as they wait for the call to connect. The hum of the phone in their ears seems to echo in the silence between them, the tension growing thicker by the second. Karen doesn't seem concerned at all, almost like she's enjoying the power play. Her arms are still crossed, and she's leaning slightly back, as if expecting the resident to back down at any moment. But they aren't going to let this go. The police dispatcher answers the call, and the resident quickly explains the situation, their voice steady but tinged with frustration as they detail the spike strips on the driveway and the fact that Karen had installed them. They mention how dangerous the strips are and how easily they could cause harm. The dispatcher listens intently, asking a few questions to clarify the situation, and assures them that officers are on their way. The resident hangs up and turns back to Karen, who is still standing there with that maddening smile. "You really think the police are going to do anything about this?" Karen sneers, her tone dripping with disdain, as if the law doesn't apply to her. The resident takes a deep breath, trying to calm the rising anger inside them. "You'll see," they say, their voice low but unwavering. Karen laughs, the sound high and mocking, as she shakes her head. "You're wasting your time," she says dismissively. "There's nothing they can do. You're overreacting." But the resident knows that this time Karen has gone too far. They aren't overreacting. They are finally standing up for themselves after years of being intimidated and manipulated by Karen's constant meddling. "We'll see about that," the resident replies firmly, standing their ground as Karen starts to turn away, clearly irritated by their defiance. But then the police arrive, 2 officers pulling up in a squad car. They park along the curb and get out, immediately assessing the situation. The resident motions to the driveway, and without needing any further explanation, the officers walk over to inspect the spike strips. One of them kneels down, examining the sharp metal spikes carefully, while the other looks around the area for any other signs of damage or danger. Karen stands off to the side, her arms still crossed. But now there's a flicker of nervousness in her eyes as she watches the officers take charge. "What's going on here?" the officer who's inspecting the spikes asks, his tone professional but firm. The resident steps forward, pointing to the metal strips. "This woman," they begin, gesturing toward Karen, "installed these spikes across my driveway without my permission. They're dangerous and could have caused serious harm." I'm not sure what she was thinking, but this is beyond just being annoying. This is criminal. Karen scoffs, her arms tightening across her chest as she steps forward, trying to take control of the situation. "I don't know what this person is talking about," she says, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. "I put them there as a way to keep people from parking too close to my yard. There's no harm in it. It's just a little deterrent." The officer raises an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced by Karen's story. "You installed spikes on someone else's property?" the officer asks, his tone growing sharper. "That's a bit more than a deterrent, don't you think?" Karen shifts uncomfortably but tries to hold her ground, still unwilling to admit she did anything wrong. "It's not a big deal," she insists, her voice a little more defensive now. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." The second officer steps forward, his expression unreadable as he looks at Karen. "Putting dangerous items on someone else's property without permission is a criminal offense," he says firmly. "You could have seriously injured someone, or worse. Do you understand that?" Karen stares at him, her face paling slightly. The realization that her actions might actually have consequences starts to sink in, but she's still too stubborn to back down. "This is ridiculous," she mutters under her breath, her bravado slipping. The officers exchange a look, clearly done with Karen's excuses. "You're under arrest for placing hazardous materials on private property," the first officer announces, moving toward Karen with calm but decisive steps. "Step over here." Karen's face contorts with disbelief as the officer reaches for her arms. But there's no escape. Her hands are quickly secured in cuffs, and the resident can hardly believe what they're witnessing. The woman who had made their life so difficult, the one who had always thought she was untouchable, is now standing in front of them with her hands behind her back. The scene feels surreal as Karen is led away by the officers, her face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. She had never imagined this would happen to her. She had always thought she was in control of everything in the neighborhood, always able to manipulate situations and bend people to her will, but now that very control is slipping through her fingers as the handcuffs bite into her wrists. She stares at the resident with a look of pure fury, as if they had personally betrayed her. How dare they call the police on her? She had always seen herself as the queen of the block, the one who made the rules and enforced them with an iron fist, but now she's being treated like a common criminal, and it infuriates her beyond belief. The officers guide her toward the squad car, their movements efficient and practiced. She struggles to keep her composure, but the tension is evident in every step she takes. Her pride has taken a massive hit, and her mind is racing, trying to think of a way to get out of this situation. She had never expected anyone to stand up to her, not like this, and especially not someone she had seen as beneath her for so long. As the officers push her into the back seat of the police car, she tries to maintain her defiant posture, but it's clear that the fight has left her. She sits there, glaring at the resident through the rear window, her eyes full of venom, as she realizes she has no way out. She's completely at the mercy of the law. The resident watches the whole thing unfold with a sense of disbelief mixed with satisfaction. The moment they've been waiting for has arrived. Karen is finally facing the consequences of her actions. The woman who had made their life difficult for so long is now the one in trouble, and it feels good. The resident watches as the squad car pulls away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance, their heart still racing from the adrenaline of the confrontation. It's hard to believe that it's actually over, that Karen is really gone, that she's not out there somewhere still pulling the strings and making life miserable for everyone around her. They stand there for a few moments, taking in the quiet of the street. The whole neighborhood seems to exhale with relief, as if it had been holding its breath for far too long. They know this won't be the end of Karen's antics, But for now, it feels like a small victory in a battle that had dragged on far too long. They turn and head back to their house, the driveway, now clear of the dangerous spike strips. They can finally breathe easy knowing that their property is safe again. They glance down the street at the other houses, wondering how many of their neighbors had witnessed the scene, how many had been watching from their windows or their front porches. But it doesn't matter to the resident anymore. They know that the message has been sent loud and clear. Karen's reign of terror in the neighborhood is over, at least for now. But it doesn't take long for the next chapter of this saga to begin. As the resident heads inside, they begin to think about what comes next, the legal side of things, the fallout from Karen's arrest. It won't be smooth sailing from here on out, they know that, but it's a price they're willing to pay if it means that the neighborhood will finally be free of Karen's oppressive rule. They make a mental note to call the other neighbors to let them know what happened, to give them the closure they all deserve after years of quietly enduring Karen's tyrannical ways. As the hours pass and the day moves on, the news of Karen's arrest spreads through the neighborhood quickly. Word travels fast, and soon everyone knows what happened. Some neighbors express surprise at the outcome, others quietly express their relief. But all of them feel a sense of justice in the air. It's as if the neighborhood has collectively let out a sigh of relief, a weight lifted off their shoulders after years of tension and fear. But even with the moment of victory in hand, the resident knows that Karen's influence won't be easily forgotten. She had left a lasting mark on the community, and it would take time to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. But for now, they can finally enjoy the peace that had been so long denied them. The next few days feel like a strange calm after the storm. The neighborhood is quieter than usual as the residents process what had just happened. Word spreads fast, and the once tight-lipped community seems to come alive with whispers about Karen's arrest. Everyone's talking about it, some in disbelief, some in relief, and others with a touch of concern, wondering what consequences might come from standing up to her. It's clear that Karen's arrest has shaken the neighborhood to its core. No one expected her to go so far, or for anyone to actually hold her accountable. But now that it's happened, there's an air of uncertainty lingering over everything. While some are excited by the prospect of finally being free from her control, others worry about what she might do next. Will she take revenge? Will she try to retaliate in some way to regain her power? Or will she simply slink away in defeat? The resident can't help but feel a mixture of emotions themselves. They had been so focused on the immediate satisfaction of seeing Karen handcuffed and taken away, but now the aftermath is starting to sink in. It's not over yet. The legal side of things will play out in ways they don't yet understand. The police have promised to follow up, but they don't know how long the process will take, or if Karen has any tricks up her sleeve. She's not someone who's used to losing, not in the way she's lost now, and it's hard to imagine her just disappearing quietly into the background. They try to push those thoughts aside and focus on the small victories. The driveway is clear, no more spikes, no more danger, no more waking up every day wondering what Karen would do next. They're free for now, but they know better than to think it's all over. There's still a long road ahead. The first sign of that comes when they receive a letter from Karen's attorney, a thick envelope addressed in bold letters with Karen's name written across the front. The resident hesitates before opening it, knowing full well that whatever is inside won't be good news. They rip the envelope open and pull out the letter. It's a legal document threatening to sue for defamation and harassment, stating that Karen plans to take action against the resident for calling the police on her without provocation and for causing her emotional distress. The letter is filled with legal jargon and vague threats, but the message is clear: Karen is not going down without a fight, and she's using every tool at her disposal to make sure she's not the one who ends up losing in the end. The resident reads the letter several times, trying to process the implications. They knew Karen wouldn't just accept defeat, but they didn't expect her to come back swinging so soon. Their first instinct is to panic, but then they remember something: Karen doesn't have the same control she once did. No matter how many threats she makes, she's not in charge of the neighborhood anymore, and she certainly can't make them feel afraid of her again. They fold the letter and set it aside for the moment. It's not worth stressing over just yet. Instead, they take a deep breath and look out the window at the peaceful neighborhood outside the calm streets, the neighbors going about their business as if nothing had changed. They know they've done the right thing. They stood up for what was right, even if it meant putting themselves in the line of fire. And even if Karen is plotting her next move, they're ready to face whatever comes next with the same courage they've shown all along. They don't want to get into a legal battle with Karen. They don't want to deal with more drama, but they won't back down either. They won't let her continue to control the neighborhood or intimidate anyone else into silence. They'll keep fighting for the peace they deserve, even if it means standing alone for a while. The days continue to pass, and the tension lingers, but with every day that Karen doesn't show up at their door with some new scheme or some new demand, they feel a little more confident that this time it really is over. The neighborhood begins to return to normal in small ways. People start to smile at each other again, greeting one another in the streets, as if the invisible walls Karen had built between them were finally coming down. The resident realizes that the battle they fought wasn't just about stopping Karen's spike strips, it was about reclaiming their own peace of mind and their sense of safety. It was about sending a message to the whole neighborhood that it's okay to stand up for yourself and that no one person should ever have the power to control or intimidate others again. The victory is sweet, but they know the fight isn't truly over. There will be more challenges ahead, but they are ready to face them, knowing they have the support of their neighbors and the strength to stand firm when it matters most. Days turn into weeks, and the initial shock of Karen's arrest begins to fade, but the aftershocks continue to ripple through the neighborhood. The residents are still talking about it, some quietly relieved, others feeling a sense of unease lingering in the air. There are the occasional whispered conversations between neighbors who had never spoken much before, all of them trying to process the strange turn of events. It's as if they're all collectively holding their breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop, for Karen to return in some dramatic fashion and try to regain control. But so far she hasn't shown her face, no angry confrontations, no bitter retaliation. The silence from her side is almost unnerving, but the resident can't shake the feeling that it's only a temporary lull. Before something worse happens, they keep their guard up. But at the same time, they try to go about their daily life, trying to ignore the looming threat of Karen's next move. The letter from her attorney sits on their desk, a constant reminder that this situation isn't over yet. But for now, there's no need to worry about it. Karen hasn't taken any legal action against them, at least not yet, and the neighborhood seems to be returning to a fragile sense of normalcy. The driveway is safe now, free of the dangerous spike strips that had once marred it, but there's still that underlying tension in the air every time they walk down the street and see a neighbor's door slightly ajar or catch a glimpse of someone looking out their window. They can't help but wonder if Karen is out there somewhere quietly plotting her next attack. It's a constant nagging feeling that won't go away, but they don't let it control them. They refuse to let Karen's shadow loom over their lives any longer. One afternoon, while they're sitting in the living room, their phone buzzes with a message from a neighbor. It's a simple text reading, "Karen's back." The message sends a chill through their spine. Their heart rate quickens as they quickly read the text again, trying to make sense of it. What does that mean? Is Karen really back? Or is this some sort of prank? They immediately rush to the window and glance down the street. But there's no sign of Karen, no squad cars, no commotion, just the same peaceful neighborhood they've come to know. But something feels different. The air feels thicker, more charged, as if the calm before the storm is settling in. They try to push the panic down, take a deep breath, and focus on the facts. They don't know what this message means, or if it's even true, but they can't let their imagination run wild. They shoot a quick reply back to the neighbor asking what they meant by it, but they don't get a response, not right away. The minutes drag by, and the unease only grows worse. The quiet suburban street now feels too still, like a ticking time bomb just waiting to go off. They pace around the house, trying to keep their mind occupied, but the unease won't go away. Every time they look out the window, they're scanning the street for any sign of movement, any clue that something is about to happen, but nothing changes, nothing happens, not yet. But they can feel it, something is coming. The silence is broken when they hear the faint sound of tires rolling down the street, the familiar hum of an engine followed by the screech of brakes as a car slows down in front of their house. They glance out the window and their heart skips a beat when they see the familiar figure of Karen standing there in the front yard of the house across the street. She's not looking at them, but the sight of her is enough to send a surge of panic through their chest. They watch as she speaks to someone in the driveway, her voice a low murmur, but it's clear that she's up to something, they don't know what yet. But the sense of dread is palpable, they can't make out the details. But Karen's presence is undeniable, she's back, and whatever she's planning this time, it's not going to be a simple inconvenience like before. It's clear that she's not done with them or the neighborhood, and they know deep down that whatever happens next, it's only the beginning of a much larger confrontation. The resident watches from the window, their heart pounding in their chest, as Karen stands across the street, her back to them. As she talks to a man in the driveway of the house, the exchange is tense even from this distance, and they can feel the hairs on the back of their neck stand up as the man seems to gesture toward their property. Before shaking his head in what looks like disapproval, Karen responds with a sharp motion of her hand, dismissing whatever point the man had tried to make. The resident can't make out the words, but the body language is clear. Karen is in control of the situation once again, and they don't like it at all. They pull back from the window, feeling a knot tighten in their stomach. Something is happening, and they're not sure if it's something they can stop this time. They try to steady their breath and think through their options, but there's only one clear thought in their mind: Karen is back, and this time it feels different. It's not the small acts of annoyance she used to pull, it's something bigger, something more dangerous. The resident picks up their phone and texts the neighbor who had sent them the message about Karen's return, but gets no response. The silence only adds to the sense of unease settling over them. They move toward the door, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on their shoulders. But as they step outside, they face the car that Karen had been talking to the man in just moments before is now parked in front of their house, blocking the driveway. A feeling of dread washes over them as they stare at the unfamiliar vehicle. It's a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, and they don't recognize the make or model. It's not a car that belongs to anyone in the neighborhood, at least not anyone they know, and that only makes things worse. Their pulse quickens, and they take a hesitant step toward the car, only to see Karen watching them from the driveway across the street, her gaze sharp and calculating. The smug look that had been on her face during her previous encounters is gone now, replaced with a cold and focused expression. She isn't playing games anymore, and the resident knows it. They turn back to the house and quickly step inside, locking the door behind them, their mind racing with possibilities. They don't know what Karen's up to this time, but they know it won't be anything good. It's clear she has help now, and she's not trying to intimidate them in the same way she had before. This is something more organized and methodical. They grab their phone once again, this time calling the police, but as the phone rings, they feel their anxiety rise. They don't know how much time they have or what kind of trouble Karen has stirred up this time. They briefly consider calling the other neighbors, but they can't risk drawing attention to themselves. Not yet. They need more information. They need to know what Karen is planning before they act. The phone picks up, and the dispatcher's calm voice fills their ear. The resident quickly explains the situation as succinctly as possible, mentioning the strange car blocking their driveway and the fact that Karen is across the street, but doesn't mention the man she's with or what they were talking about. The dispatcher listens and assures them that an officer will be dispatched right away. But as the call ends, the resident is left feeling more unsettled than ever. It feels like the calm before the storm, only the storm isn't here yet, and they don't know when it's coming or how it will strike. It's hard to shake the feeling that Karen has some plan in motion, a plan that's far bigger than just the petty games she's played before. The thought lingers in their mind as they watch from the window once again. Karen is still talking to the man in the driveway, and the conversation seems to be growing more heated. They don't know if it's a confrontation or a negotiation, but it's clear that whatever Karen is trying to do, she's not working alone anymore. The resident's mind races, trying to piece everything together, but they can't see the whole picture. They don't know enough yet, and time is running out. The sound of sirens cuts through the silence, breaking the tension momentarily. The police are here, but it's not clear if they're coming for Karen or just responding to a vague call. It's hard to tell what's happening, but the resident knows they can't wait any longer. They have to act fast. They quickly step back from the window and head for the door. But just as they reach for the handle, they hear a knock, a sharp, loud rap on the door. They freeze, their heart skipping a beat, and their mind immediately jumps to worst case scenarios. Is Karen here? Is she with the man? Is she already coming for them with her next move? Their hands shake as they slowly reach for the doorknob, ready to face whatever comes next. They take a deep breath and open the door, but standing there is not Karen, it's an officer holding a notepad and a radio at their side, looking serious, but not alarmed yet. The resident exhales in relief, but the sense of unease hasn't gone away. The officer steps forward and greets the resident with a calm but firm tone, as if sensing the anxiety in the air. They introduce themselves and ask if everything is all right. The resident nods quickly, trying to mask the tension in their voice, and gestures toward the window where Karen and the mysterious man are still talking. It's clear that the officer notices the change in the resident's demeanor, and they follow the look over to the street. The officer's eyes narrow slightly, but they don't immediately move toward the driveway. Instead, they take a moment to assess the situation before turning back to the resident. They ask if there's anything they should know, and if the resident feels threatened. The resident quickly explains the situation about the car blocking the driveway, Karen's strange behavior, and the man she's been talking to. It's a vague explanation, but enough to get the officer's attention. The officer listens carefully, making notes in their notepad before asking a few follow-up questions, such as whether the resident has had previous issues with Karen or if they've seen any suspicious activity. Before the resident replies that they have dealt with Karen's antics in the past, but this is something new, something that feels more dangerous. The officer nods in understanding and then turns to the street again, looking at the car and the people in the driveway. Before offering a reassuring word to the resident, the officer says they'll check it out and make sure everything is all right. But they also ask the resident to stay inside and not confront anyone directly. The resident agrees with a reluctant nod, though the unease still hasn't fully dissipated. They watch as the officer walks toward the street and approaches Karen and the man in the driveway, their heart racing once again as they wonder what might happen next. Will the officer confront Karen? Will they get to the bottom of what's really going on? Or is this just the beginning of something worse? The minutes drag on, feeling like hours, as the officer speaks to Karen and the mysterious man. There's no sign of any immediate conflict, no shouting or confrontations, at least not from what the resident can see. But the tension is thick, and the resident can feel their breath catch in their throat with every passing second. They watch the officer take notes, exchange words with the two of them, and then finally step back away from the group. Karen is still standing there, arms crossed, looking defiant. The man beside her appears calm but unreadable. Neither one of them seems particularly worried or intimidated by the officer's presence, and that only raises more questions in the resident's mind. What is Karen up to now? What's her plan this time? Just as they begin to wonder what's taking so long, the officer walks back toward the house. The resident steps forward to meet them, their voice a mix of relief and confusion. They ask if everything's okay, if they've managed to figure out what's going on. The officer looks them in the eye and nods, but there's something about their expression that doesn't sit right with the resident. The officer's words are carefully measured as they explain that Karen and the man she's with are indeed known to them, but they don't have enough evidence to take further action at this time. The officer emphasizes that there's no immediate threat, but they'll keep an eye on the situation and suggests the resident keep reporting anything unusual. They don't leave with the satisfaction the resident was hoping for. It's not the resolution they expected or wanted. Karen is still out there, still free to roam the neighborhood with whatever plans she's hatched with her mysterious accomplice. The officer assures them that the situation will be monitored, but it's clear that they aren't as concerned as the resident is. They turn away and walk back toward their squad car, leaving the resident standing at the door with a growing sense of unease. Karen may not be causing immediate trouble at this moment, but the presence of the man by her side, the fact that they both seemed so calm and collected in the face of the officers questioning it, all points to something far bigger than a petty neighborhood dispute. The resident watches as the officer drives away, and the car blocking their driveway is finally moved. It doesn't feel like a victory. Not yet. The anxiety is still there, lingering in the air, as Karen and the man walk back toward her car. Exchanging a few quiet words, they don't look back at the resident, but the feeling of dread doesn't go away. The resident heads back inside, but they can't shake the sense that the situation isn't over yet. Karen isn't finished with them, not by a long shot. And whatever she's planning, it's only just beginning. The following days feel like a slow burn. The sense of unease continues to hang over the neighborhood like a dark cloud. The residents are on edge, aware that Karen hasn't given up despite the officer's visit. Despite the fact that nothing drastic has happened since then, they know she's still scheming. Something is brewing beneath the surface, and they can feel it in the air. They keep their eyes open, watching for any sign that Karen and her mysterious accomplice are up to something. But for now, everything appears normal. The neighborhood resumes its usual rhythms. Neighbors exchange pleasantries, the kids play in the street, and the sounds of everyday life return. But the resident can't shake the nagging feeling that something is about to change. They're more cautious now, keeping their distance from Karen and her strange friend, but still trying to keep things civil. The tension is palpable, but they try to ignore it and go on with their routine. The house is quiet except for the occasional phone call or text from concerned neighbors who are all feeling the same weight of uncertainty. Everyone's waiting for the next move from Karen, wondering when and how she'll strike again. But it's the waiting game that's the hardest, the constant build-up of dread with no clear resolution in sight. One afternoon, the residents' worst fear is realized. Karen reappears like a shadow, slipping back into the neighborhood with her accomplice in tow. This time they're driving a different car, a nondescript white van with no markings, no clues as to what it's for. But the presence of the vehicle alone makes the residents' heart race. They spot the van parked near the end of the street. At first, it seems harmless, just another vehicle among many, but the feeling of dread rises again as they see Karen and the man talking near it. Their words are too muffled to hear, but the sight of them together brings back all the unease the resident felt before. This time, Karen isn't as visible as before. She's hiding behind the van, as if plotting something more secretive, something more dangerous. The resident can't take it anymore. They step outside, trying to maintain control of their emotions, but it's impossible to ignore the tension that's mounting with every passing second. They walk down the driveway, cautiously approaching the street, trying to get a better view of what's going on. They stop just short of the sidewalk, not wanting to draw attention, but the sight of Karen whispering to her accomplice while he glances over his shoulder sends a cold chill through their body. They can't make out the details, but it's clear that this isn't a casual conversation. This is something planned, something deliberate. Karen looks up for a moment, and their eyes meet for just a split second. The look on her face sends a shiver down the resident's spine. It's not the same smug confidence she had before. It's colder, more calculating, more dangerous. She knows they're watching, she knows they're on alert, and it only makes her more determined. The resident steps back, quickly retreating into the safety of their home. They're shaking, their mind racing with possibilities. What could Karen be planning now? What does the white van have to do with this? They don't know, but it feels like they're walking right into a trap. They don't want to overreact, but the sense of danger is overwhelming. They grab their phone and text a few neighbors, warning them that Karen is back, and something doesn't feel right. But as they send the message, their phone buzzes again with an unexpected alert. This time it's from the local news. The headline catches their eye, and the stomach drops. Neighborhoods on edge after suspicious activity reported in suburban community. The article details reports of unusual behavior in the area, including strange vehicles and unknown individuals loitering around residential neighborhoods. The article makes no direct mention of Karen, but the implication is clear. Something's happening, and it's getting attention. They scan the rest of the article in disbelief, trying to make sense of the situation, but there's no clear answer, just more questions. What does this mean? Is Karen involved? Is she part of some larger plan, something that's drawing in more people? Or is she working with forces beyond the neighborhood? The resident feels a growing sense of urgency. They can't wait any longer. They can't just sit by and hope everything resolves itself. Karen is more dangerous now than ever, and whatever she's planning, it's not something they can afford to ignore. They check the windows, once again peering outside, cautiously looking for any sign of movement. But this time there's nothing. The street is empty, the van is gone, and Karen and the man are nowhere to be seen. It's a brief moment of calm before the storm. The resident knows it's not over, it's just beginning. Whatever Karen has planned, it's coming, and they won't be able to stop it alone. But they're not alone in this fight. The neighborhood is on alert, and together they'll face whatever comes next.